Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Hey, welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Evan Hauger, Russ Dunning, and Aaron Crouch. So we're going to take you guys through some return to sport stuff that we do on a regular basis with our clients, with our athletes, with some of our pro athletes and such that we see here in our day-to-day treatment options. So some of the considerations we make as far as when is it appropriate to return to sport, how fast and how hard to push, and of course I think the mental side of it is probably going to be something we discuss as well. Yeah?
Yeah.
100%.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Be a good one.
Seems to be the theme. All right, so what are we drinking here?
All right, for beer, this is a classic. We've got Great White, which is from Lost Coast Brewery, which is up on the north coast of California. It's kind of a light, easy drinker.
For sure.
My kind.
Light and easy.
Lager?
It's a lager. See?
Is it?
Drink
It's a white.
Whites in my life.
It's a white. It's a white something.
Eureka. We had
Too strong.
we had one in Reading. No, this one's in Eureka.
Yeah, we're going north part of the state.
Yeah.
That's about as north as you can get.
Yes.
About as north as you can get.
Yeah.
Except for Oregon and Washington, but other than that,
State of California. State of California. We're trying to stay within our own home state.
Oh, I see.
Really support local.
Yeah.
You know.
I've got a couple beers from Reno that we have to do. It's their new Reno facility, so
Nice.
we'll do that next time.
My stepbrother's his brewery has got like 6 new beers since we hosted that one.
Movement
Yeah.
Brewery?
Yeah, we need to get some more.
They've done really well.
Done really well.
Is that because of us? That's
Movement has
fantastic.
0. Yeah, no, probably not.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Everything they do is good though. Their social media is good. Their apparel, like it's
Yeah,
it's
right.
top notch.
Sorry, that was
Podcast sponsorship.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
it's a personal plug.
All right, so let's talk about what we do for some return to sports stuff and consideration. So obviously this is a big topic that we can expand upper extremity, lower extremity, and all those variables that we look for. So yeah, let's kick it off. I think that when you look at return to sport, I think one of the biggest things to appreciate, of course, is the gravity and the speed of the game. And I couldn't emphasize it enough, and I think we should start with this, is that if you're not familiar with the game that you're returning somebody to, I think you have a responsibility to get really familiar. And that could mean that to go or to watch it. I mean, now you have no excuse not to watch something on YouTube or at least see what it's all about to some degree. But I couldn't emphasize enough to get on the sideline as close as you can to a sporting event of that level.
Yeah.
So if it's a high school athlete, a collegiate athlete, a pro athlete, you just, every time I see it and every time in that position, I'm just like in awe about the speed and the intensity of the game. And when you think about what you do in the clinic, you think about the gap between those things and how wide that is. It's just really, really incredible. So I think we got a tall task in front of us always to be like, how do we take someone from the level that they're at to that level of eliteness and performance. And actually, at the end of the day, when you're talking about sport, you're talking about somebody trying to beat somebody else. So it's not 100% effort, but it's probably 110, 120% effort. And especially if you're doing a sport where you're going offense against defense, where you actually have to react to somebody else's stimulus. That's by far our biggest challenge in the game. And it's consistent whether you're in soccer trying to get separation from somebody, or if you're in basketball, or whether you're in football, or even if you're in baseball. I mean, we take it for granted, be like, it's baseball, it's just a pitcher, he's just throwing it just like it is a bullpen. Well, it's not just a bullpen when you've got 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth and you've got to get the number 4 hitter out.
Yeah.
You need a little something extra, or whatever the situation is.
So there's a few things you said there. I mean, the in-game scenario is always the adrenaline component of it, right? So if you use baseball as the example, somebody in a non-game scenario, they would expect to throw multiple miles an hour slower than they do in a game scenario, and there's nothing different about their implement. Like, the ball is still 5 ounces, their cleats are the same size. The only difference is that maybe there's 50,000 people watching them and more on TV, and somebody that they're competing against that's not on their team on the other side. So there's an adrenaline component, and every sport has those pieces.
And it can't be replicated in any other scenario
That
other than
can't.
competition. So you have to
Right.
100% understand that they're going to go out there at 110%. And so when you clear someone, know the speed of the game, the competition they'll be facing, because we'll talk about professional athletes to high school athletes, and especially in high school, you have the difference between a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, a senior. Each year is an exponential change in their physical development, in their speed, their understanding of the game, their awareness. And you take a junior or a junior going up against a senior in football, their size difference could be huge. Their competition factor is something you can't replicate in the clinic. You can't replicate it even in the practice setting, to some regard. So you have to like really be confident in the things that you've taken them through, the battery of tests, the physical challenges you've taken them through, to say, yeah, that shoulder you dislocated last season, I think it's good to kind of reach out and tackle a guy.
Well, that's the thing. There's a little leap of faith here at some point,
100%,
right? Like
yeah.
you've taken their ACL through the triple hop and all the other pieces that you get to that point. But like to your point, none of those actually replicate the in-game scenario. So at some point, you've got to say, little leap of faith here to some degree.
Yeah, and I think that's where practice comes in.
Exactly.
And I think this makes it probably the most challenging person to return to sport, frankly, is the adult. The recreational soccer player.
Yes.
Because they don't practice.
No.
Right.
So it's like, typically like
Couch to competition.
Yeah, and the weekend warrior is brutal, right? Versus if you're rehabbing someone who's in a team sport where they're training, 5 days a week and they have 1 or 2 games a week, you can get them into practice in modified venues and modified environments and start to challenge things in a way. But at the end of the day, I'd say that we really look for two main factors. I'd say we look for what's the ability of the athlete to really control their own body in space. Can you really have full control of your own body? So a lot of people talk about how fast are you and how high can you jump and those things, but when you're taking someone to return to sport, that means they're coming from injury. So most likely the injury occurred during deceleration, more so than acceleration. So you have to make sure they can decelerate, and that's what's going to lead them to change direction or change pace, which is going to lead to success in sport, which is getting separation. So if you're in sports, you can think about basketball as whoever scores the most points, but the reality of who wins the game is who gets the most separation. Same thing with soccer, same thing with football. Can you get separation from your defender? And that requires deceleration, change of pace, change of direction. So we want to make sure the athlete can do that on their own first, and then eventually be able to react to an outside stimulus. And then the second component I would say would be their fatigue resiliency. Is can you do that for 2 hours?
Yeah.
It's one thing to do a couple sets of 8, or a couple sets of 10, or do a 30-minute PT session, or even a light, 30-minute practice, or even an hour practice. Can you go for 2 hours hard in a game-like situation and have that endurance component?
I had a phenomenal conversation with one of the PTs we're onboarding right now, and she said that it was kind of eye-opening to go through some of our curriculum and see that the kind of developing a program for someone, maybe the skill-based things should go before the speed and power, strength and conditioning, because you want to like maximize the learning process of that skill. Normally she does it after all the speed and power and strength and conditioning stuff because she wants them under fatigue. And she was right and / wrong at the same time. She was right in the sense that we need to challenge these people when they have the acquired skill to use it under intensely fatigued states, because you want to see, do they break down and do they start to compensate, because that's what's going to lead to the injury. And then in our learning situation in that moment, it was put a new skill that they're learning for the first time in the forefront. But I think for our interaction, it just kind of resonated with me to say, you have to challenge these athletes under duress and in a tired, fatigued state on the things that are going to be demanded of them in between the lines.
Now, I'll say something to that. I think we've been talking about specifically non-contact injuries. When in our world, we can classify the injury in terms of a contact or a non-contact. Did someone slide tackle them out in the field and took out their limb and they sprained their ankle or sprained their knee in that course? Or did they cut and they had a failure to control their own body? And if it's a non-contact injury, our return to sport curriculum means that they have to become better than they were before. If we get to prior level of function and use some simple measures to grade that, then we should fully expect a re-injury. So if you had an injury with this current body of yours as a tool, as a weapon out on the field, and you got injured in a non-contact way, then to return back to that, you have to become something better than you were, which means the developmental process has to be insane and awesome and time standing, and to fully develop and become a different weapon than you were before. And if it was a contact injury, then maybe what you were before was good enough and it was just kind of luck of the draw. You got slide tackled. You need to work on better separation. But I think that's one key component. But you also mentioned conditioning, and I think people can make a mistake by develop conditioning with ways that maybe are fresh. It's a fresh skill. They just learn how to cut cut, how we're going to work on cutting, and we're going to do more cutting. Now we're going to do 100 cuts inside of 10 minutes. If you haven't built conditioning in a safe way first, then you're trying to improve conditioning with something that is still very much in the skill category. And so I think it's so critical to develop conditioning with something advanced only after it's built safely.
Yeah. And I want to go back to what you said about change of direction, Tony. And so I think a lot of people understand the progression of change of direction from linear to multi-directional to reactive to competitive. But I don't think we always think about equipment, and we can progress people's equipment. So to your point, like to practice stuff, somebody in flat-soled shoes on turf in a gym space making a cut is completely different than when you put spikes on and get on grass or on turf. On a field scenario, right? The forces go way up, so we can progress things from an equipment perspective too, and that can be kind of sports specific.
Yeah, yeah. I think those two things are all huge, and then I think the other big factor people ask, well, how do you do this? How do you plan for a sport you do or don't know, or all these different variations? And I'm not gonna say it's simple, but the concept is simple, and the concept is take the goal, whatever it is. So if you want to play golf again, or if you want to you want to play basketball or you want to play football, whatever position it might be, take that and then you just work backwards. What are the required things of that position? So let's say for golf, so there's an average golfer, he's going to shoot between 80 and 90 strokes, so his fatigue resistance has got, I would say, wanted to do at least probably 2 buckets of balls to get through his swing and not have breakdown in his spine or in his knee or whatever the injury level is. Doesn't really matter to me, but he should be able to swing maybe through 2 buckets and not really have symptoms if we're going to say, hey, let's go back out and maybe compete in golf. Granted, 18 plus of those strokes are going to be putts, so you're probably doing 50, 60 fairly hard full swings, but still we want to train that through the fatigue state, so that practice is actually more difficult than a game or a competitive environment. And then break it down to all right, how many swings does he have to do? He's got to do, say it's about 60 to 80 swings, and then we're going to make it from there, how many swings with the wedge, how many swings with the driver, and then from there, what's appropriate. So as we get closer down to the thing, let's break it down and say, okay, I only want you to do wedge through 9-iron. You're going to do 20 swings that are there, and then maybe even lower level than that, be let's do 20 half swings with the pitching wedge and the sand wedge. Mm-hmm. And then lower level than that, I just want you to take your wedge and just do shadow swings where you're not hitting the ball and you're not focusing on contact, you're just going through the motion, right? And then a level below that is, let's use a medicine ball and just do the same movement with the medicine ball, so we have some load and we're doing it without thinking about hitting the target or the object. And then below that, it's, can we just tolerate trunk rotation with a chopping motion or a lifting motion? And you just keep chipping away at it down to the basics, where you end up with someone in a supine on the ground doing lower trunk rotations, as their baseline foundational rotational movement. So the challenge here is, can you take a sport and take a movement in that sport? Let's say an outside hitter for volleyball. What does that motion look like? What's the expectation of that athlete? And then just piece it down. How many reps do they have to do at the peak level? What do you want? What's your goal? And then let's start cutting that. What's step by step what has to be accomplished, and then put a time frame to it. We talked about tissue adaptation in another KIMEcast as far as what that takes and how long it takes, and it varies by person. So even though you might say, hey, this is my process, I want to go through all these steps, somebody might jump 4 or 5 steps really quickly, or somebody else might take more time to those steps just based on their body, their adaptation, their tissue, the degree of the injury, and the degree of competition they're playing in.
And we get a lot of questions on this, and we get very concerned parents of young athletes, of teenage athletes, even college athletes, and the parents will say, I'm not sure if they're going to be ready. I think they got really mentally disturbed with that injury, or I'm not sure if they're going to be confident when they get out in the field. And when we go through this progression, I get to tell the parent, don't worry. The repetitions are going to take care of themselves. Confidence is not given. I can't brainwash your child or your son, your daughter, your athlete. This is not a trickery of the mind. It is built off of repetition, and that repetition instills confidence in the movement, and then that instills itself into the play on the field. And so when you walk the walk through that process, you're not only developing getting into the tissue adaptation and progressing from that, but you also get the brain involvement too, the mental side of things. And that mental side is so huge to build confidence with your body that it can handle 120% effort without breaking down.
I think it's hard because I think in any scenario, deconstructing the pattern that they're going to have to go and perform at is the obvious goal. You're going to be faced with maybe two scenarios, and one scenario is a lot harder than the other. First scenario is you have the luxury of time, as in you get to say, yeah, you have this extended period of time, maybe over many months, to work yourself back up to a rotational power to either swing a golf club, hit a volleyball, swing a bat, throw a baseball, whatever it may be. And then on the other scenario, you don't have the luxury of time. You're an in-season management of this athlete, and PTs get this. It's not just the first responders on the field. It's say, hey, a football player is coming in after a Friday night injury. They felt pain on Saturday, which is maybe not that uncommon. They lingered on Sunday, and now it's a problem on Monday. They're going to see you on Monday as the therapist or the provider, and if you're in that luxury situation, and say, can I go this Friday? And you've got to be able to go through those steps in a very strategic fashion, understand what tissue's at fault, understand your tissue timeline healing kind of foundational knowledge, and then what patterns do they need to be able to do, and deconstruct it in that moment and see how far they get up to or close to the necessary movement pattern for their sport, and decide in the moment, can you either go in 4 days, can you go in 7 days, can you go in 2 weeks, can you go in 4 weeks? That's an art, and I think that we could all probably provide examples for people listening to learn from, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because, man, it really comes down to what's the injury, and of course the degree of the injury, but also the position they play, and like what's demanded on them. So, like, for example, I mean, and I have not worked with these people, so I couldn't say, but just as current sports athletes that we see out there, if you look at Gronk, for example, as a tight end, if he comes down with a hamstring injury, if he can kind of run at 70%, 80%, he still has a spot with a helmet on and pads on, because he doesn't have to outrun people.
No.
He can block, he can certainly get a little separation, and he's so big that he's still valuable and he's a big target, right? Versus if you have Tyreek Hill, who's maybe the fastest guy in the league, if he has a hamstring issue, the way he wins is he gets separation. I mean, it's kind of spectacular.
Yeah,
to see someone be 5 or 10 yards ahead of another NFL player, especially a quarterback or a safety, and he's just like light years out in front, and it's just like catches wide open balls. So if he's got a hamstring issue, that's taken away from him, and now he's got to be able to get separation at 10 or 20 yards and do comeback routes and shorter routes, and that's not his game. So he may not be effective to be back out in the game, just as a type of player that he is, And those are same thing at the quarterback position. I mean, you could say something about Tom. Tom could have a broken leg, and it may not matter because he only has to take 3 steps,
Yeah, right.
It doesn't matter. But if you're Russell Wilson with a broken leg, you're done for the season, because that's your gameplay. It's your strategy. So it does get down to specificity of style of play, and at the elite professional athlete level. You do have to make those decisions, and those calls become valuable.
I mean, what I find myself doing with some of the pro athletes is recognizing the injury and say, you're okay to train, just don't do this. And I don't do that with young athletes because they're kind of young and dumb. I never trust a 15-year-old with any type of advice like that. But if we're talking with the pro athlete that's going to do something anyways, then having that adjunct. I remember when Uriah, at the age of 40, returned back to the UFC. So Uriah Faber, prior champion, retired. Love him for making a comeback, because that's just how he is mentally, so mentally strong. And right when he decided to come back to the UFC and have a comeback fight as a 40-year-old retired UFC veteran, he suffered an AC sprain. And he's still stuck with the plan. He goes, I'm still going to train. Although my AC joint's a bit jacked from falling on it, the fight's 7 weeks away, I'm still going to do this. And really, the only way I could kind of help him there was say, just don't do this. And then I told him what not to do. He said, fine, I'll work within that. I'll train these ways. We let it heal with the help of, with a nice doc in the area, gave him a nice little PRP injection. He did some BFR, of course. He did some rehab to it. But during the rehab process, he still trained around the injury. I think that's the lesson of pro athletes, is that they're going to work, They're going to do work whether or not the therapist or the coach say so, and you got to guide them. Do this, don't do that, because you have to understand the tissue involved.
But there's like the rehab or the management scenario too, right? And we kind of end up falling into both of these at different times. And depending on the high schooler versus the pro guy scenario, who we communicate with might change, right? With the pro athlete, maybe you're communicating with the organization or the coach or whatever it is. You're communicating with somebody on, can this guy go? Well, here are the risks that are involved in this, and then here are the things they can still do, and here are the things they can't. And maybe with the high school kid, it's the parent and the kid that ultimately make the decision on when they play.
Yeah.
And so kind of who you educate on the risk factors here, and it really is like a risk assessment when you're talking about management of an injury.
And those managements, they can come in the acute phase. So I think in the acute phase, it's how much time can you buy? Like what you consider a lot is timing. Like where are we at in the season? What's most important? Like we work with one of the more perennial football powerhouses in all of California, up here with Folsom High, and so we would get the star running back in here on week 2 with an MCL sprain and be like, coach is asking me, hey, can you play this week? I'm like, well, what's this week? Is it more of like a preseason scrub game, or is it a league division game? And it's thankfully in his favor, it was less of a game that basically the team could win without him. It's like, all right, I think this thing needs at least like 2 or 3 weeks of healing, and then I don't really need to do corrective work in that moment. You're not going to choose to change someone's movement patterns in in-season pattern or in-season play. You're just going to help them heal the tissue, stay conditioned, so that then week 4 hits around, they're ready to go. You know, and that's like that's true management right there. Like you don't recognize in season in these really shortened time frames that you're going to change the person, get them back to their previous self, which was maybe probably a high level performer relatively, and then make sure they don't decondition so that when they get onto the field, they're not just huffing and puffing after like 2 downs, And then I think you get a little bit more elaborate with an out of season management, and you get to communicate a lot more effectively. Say like, hey, let's just kind of like take off these certain stresses from your training load. Let's back it off here. Let's maybe not play this weekend. Let's do these things. I think that a true challenge in return to sport is like recognizing, is it in season or is it out of season, and just knowing and trusting your understanding of tissue timeline healing patterns, and then what it takes to actually return to that position.
Yeah, I mean, you give thought to when I think of in season, out of season. If we're not going to be really worried about performance for another, say, like 3 months, we can take the time to put some deposits into the body, and those deposits is really called strength training. It's something that when you do a strength training type program, I'm not really expecting a return on that investment for at least 4 to 6 weeks. That's going to be way down the field, and we get that luxury of diving deep into strength training and fortifying the tissue with that method. If it is an off season, if it's in season, that management is so critical. And then from the management standpoint, conditioning is so key. Conditioning of the heart and the lungs, and making sure that you're tiring tissue safely, so that you have better mitochondrial response that regenerate tissue faster, because it's a game of blood flow and it's a game of ATP. And if we do that well, then we regenerate fast for that in-season rapid heal, and then you go.
And then other management strategies come into play too. Like maybe this is where like bracing or taping or other kind of modifications might come in, or like time management or minute restrictions in certain sports. And there's a lot of other things here that can play a role that go kind of beyond the tissue healing and go beyond the normal rehab scenario.
Yeah, I think that's great. You guys mentioned the communications aspects, like the coach and coach's expectations, and it's always interesting because you might talk to the player or the athlete in front of you that's injured, and if you're separate from the coach, where you're not in the same facility, the athlete might be like, oh man, I gotta play this weekend, it's a big game, and you're like, okay, interesting, and well, let me talk to your coach. Give me the coach's number, and you call the coach, be like, hey, I've got so and so here, and he says he's ready, he wants to really go this weekend, and what are your thoughts? He's like, oh no, he goes, I don't need him for 2 weeks. He goes, just if we do whatever you need to do for 2 weeks, and then you can have him back to me by this point, we're good to go. So I was like, sweet, perfect. That makes my job a lot easier. Now the kid wants to play, so I understand that as well. But if coach is like, no, I don't need him, or I don't, I'd rather him get healthy so we can have him at this other time. Coach can have a little bigger vision for the season. So I can't encourage that enough either to communicate to those coaches, because you might be surprised by the feedback. I've always found it to be extraordinarily positive, to be like, okay, yeah, they'll be like, yeah, I don't need him till then, or whatever you say, doc, it's up to you, just whatever's safest, we'll take him when we can get him, but we'll work without him. Or though, I've never had one say, nope, I need him this weekend, you got to get him ready by Saturday. I've never had that happen. They're just like, well, you tell me what to do, but I'll take him as soon as I can get him, or hey, I don't really need them for X, Y, and Z, and then you got some time. So I found that to be always helpful.
But it can be tricky too, because it's not often the coach that pushes to have them back sooner, especially with the young ones. It's kind of the overzealous parent that's like, wants them in the showcase for this that they've already paid for, and so there's all these other components. So the coach might say, I don't need them for 2 weeks, but the parent might say, we've got this tournament in Arizona, and I paid for it, and we got the tickets, and like we're going, so they need to play.
Yeah, the biggest thing I'd say to that, as you're probably getting to, is that never let someone return to sport. Never let them go back to a showcase or to the playoffs or to like something where like winning at all costs is that's not when they return. They have to return to at least a significant level of practice and some sort of like in Major League Baseball we would do like a rehab start, where you start with the minor league team and you go against lower competition. It really doesn't matter what the outcome is, but you get a chance to build your confidence. That's the best model.
Because it's less adrenaline.
Yeah, in the NBA you play for the D League for a game or two before you go back and just kind of get your mind right and get your confidence up. That's a critical aspect, so do not let them go back in the heart of competition.
They'll feel the pressure. Like I think this is like the Kevin Durant analogy. Not to speculate that this is anything happened in influencing the decision to allow him back in the playoffs and allow him to get hurt in the way that he got hurt, but anyone with relative hindsight or someone that's outside of that scenario can easily speculate and say like, oh yeah, he needed more time off or whatever. So we have that luxury to say it, but it's a perfect example to say like he needed more time to let the tissue heal, and then like a previous podcast we had talked about with tissue timeline of healing, it's just healed at that point. It's not tissue tolerant. It's not game speed tolerant. It's not. He doesn't have the D League experience to prepare for that playoff game, which is a playoff game where he's going to push it at 120%, win at all costs, right? And you ruin a guy's career for not a career, but you basically ruin his year.
Well, I think. Go for it. Well, ultimately, in a private outpatient clinic like this, we're not making the call either. All we can do is give our opinions, and our allegiance is to nobody but the health of the athlete, right? So at the end of the day, we should lean on that, and we can make our recommendation and say, here are the risks that you're dealing with, but ultimately, they're the ones that get to make the decision.
Well, I think if, for all the therapists listening or the clinicians that influence people, the coaches that influence people, I think a great book to read is a book called Talent Code by Daniel Boyle, and he speaks to myelin and myelination and how our body adapts to neural stress. And long story short, we do patterning over and over and over again. Our neural signal gets thicker with myelin, which means it transmits faster. So if you think of like a baseball throw, okay? So you throw a baseball, you get good at it at age 10, you start getting a lot better at age 13. By the time you're 19, the myelin from your brain to all the muscles that contribute to the throw is very thick, and that thick myelin transmits a very fast signal. Now, unfortunately, according to Daniel Boyle's research and thought process, the fastest way of becoming the second best in the world, to go from the best to the second best, the fastest way is to not do your thing for a month. You do it for a month, your body down-regulates that myelin, meaning you operate slower with what you are really good at. So for any athlete to be involved in their sport at some level early in the game is so huge. And so in his book, he'll speak to the little gym deep in Russia that has produced more female superstars in the tennis world than any other gym in the world. And he'll talk about how they'll do a half hour of slow, like almost yoga-esque tennis, for the first part of the session. And so I think as therapists, we can learn from that. And we can get athletes involved in their sport at a very low level, but bring in those patterns of whether it's a golf swing or whether it's a baseball throw or whether it's bring at a very low level. So we'll do it for baseball, we'll do towel throws. Take a towel, go through that motion. And when you do that motion, you activate the neural signal that protects that pathway. And if it is a football athlete, you're doing really kind of slow motion cutting, which is actually just a lateral lunge. We're doing the pattern that they are insanely good at. And when we do that early in the process, we protect the nervous system, which allows for a very rapid return. And if we say, no, you can't do that for 2.5 months, okay, now you can start it. It's going to take a long time for them to get good at it again. And I think the sooner we start it at a very low level, the better from a nervous standpoint. Little nerdy tirade, sorry.
That was good.
Read the book.
So this kind of like is a relative segue in the same realm of the conversation of sport, and this comes actually from a question from the audience, which will be intriguing what everyone thinks on this, because I have a very strong opinion. But we start first with, what the fuck are we doing? And is there an issue with specializing in a sport too early / too late? And I have a personal problem with kids going into one singular sport at an age where they believe that they're going to develop to a level that's going to get them a sports scholarship. I 100% believe that you're going to get the smallest population of people that are going to move on to the next level. So to tell a large population of people that they need to specialize at a young age, you're depriving them of physical development, the few opportunities in their entire lifespan to compete in organized sports, and to get the joy and the competition factor and just the variety that comes from that. I absolutely hate when I hear an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old specializing in a single sport, and then someone telling them that they have to do that to play at the next level. I can absolutely guarantee you go and survey college athletes right now, and most of them played multiple sports. I played 3 sports as a high school athlete. I played collegiate baseball right after it. I could look at an entire soccer field of 400 people, and I can point out probably 5. I'd be like, yeah, they're special. And the only thing the coach has to do is get out of their fucking way. 100%. Like, you don't need to specialize unless you have a child or a kid that is 100% dedicated to that sport, loves it so much and wants to play it all the time. That's fantastic. Let him have it. Or if you want to maximize the potential, but at the same time, the kid kind of has to want it.
He has to want it a lot.
Has to want it. Like, I absolutely hate that.
Yeah.
Absolutely hate it. Personally.
I think we even have research that supports this now,
It's
right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Kids that specialize in baseball, you don't become an athlete playing baseball. Are you kidding me?
I'm working with the head coach for UC Davis of volleyball, and I asked her, "What do you look for in your volleyball athletes?" And she oddly enough said, "You know what? I really like those who played soccer."
Yeah.
That's that, and I didn't coach her up on it. I didn't cue her up on that. She just said, "I love it when I hear that. Usually when I see it, they play both volleyball and soccer." Trainable, super trainable, good feet, good hands. This is an athlete I can work with. But in other words, to think that all you do is play that sport and you'll get really good at it, you're missing the context of physical learning. And you have to have those lessons that different sports give you.
And it's like the demise of youth development.
No, it is.
It's the demise of youth sports. Like, you just stop saying, like, I can't play, flag football this year. I can't play soccer because my travel baseball coach told me I got to play year round. Like,
how about
who
that?
cares?
How about the research that says there's no one at the youth worlds, the
Little League World Series.
You know this research better. Go.
What you were going to say?
No. I'm after that. I know I am.
Well, it's essentially they show that the people that play, the kids that play in the Little League World Series, which is like 10 to 12-year-olds, it's on TV every year, and it's an extremely small percentage of them that actually end up playing Major League Baseball. So at 10 to 12 years old, these are the best baseball players. In order to play in the Little League World Series, they've got to start in like February or March, whenever Little League starts, and then they're playing all the way. This thing's not on TV until August, September, right? So they've played an entire year of baseball. There's no other sport happening in there, and it's a very small percentage of them that go to play at another level. And this could be for many reasons, but what the research would speculate and kind of look down is body breakdown, right? So we're overdoing the same patterns over and over and over. If we're talking about baseball, rotating the same direction while their growth plates are open, right? This is a recipe for disaster. And then to Aaron's point, there's no athletic development. They're not learning other things. Kids don't have PE anymore. PE is the first thing cut from most schools. So the only athletic thing these kids are doing, and on top of that, if there is PE, they can get an exemption in almost every school if they play a sport. So if they're playing year-round baseball, that's the only activity this kid's doing. And then they go home and play Fortnite or whatever it is they do. But there's no development and then tissue breakdown. So I think there's 2 reasons probably why they don't end up there.
Yeah, for sure. There's no question that the best athletes that make it to the highest levels of their sport are the best athletes, which means you can do linear sports and multi-directional sports, and you can throw things and you can jump, and it's very, very common that you see this crossover of, and when you talk to coaches or you talk to folks or you just watch sports, you see like that guy's a great athlete. Like, he could play football, he could play basketball, he could play baseball, he could play soccer. It's his choice, whatever he wants to do. And anyone he chose, he'd probably be at least D1, if not pro in it. And
you see the best of the best get drafted into multiple leagues.
Yeah, and it's an athleticism, and that's as a youth athlete, your really job is to develop your athleticism in different things. And the more dynamic you can be, frankly, the better you are. But if you're not an athlete, then there might be some advantages to specializing early, because then at least you can master your skill set enough to
You're
play and make
maximizing
that
your
team.
potential.
Yeah, if there's no chance that you can be an athlete, that might be there. And I only think that you're usually the devil's advocate, but I'm just going to play it briefly here. That my only, I think the one challenge that we're seeing, and the decision that parents are frankly having to make is, if I don't have my kid play a sport year round, are they going to be skilled enough in that sport to make the team?
Yeah.
If I don't play the comp team this year, am I going to make
Yeah.
a comp team in a year or 2 years or 3 years?
100%.
And then it's like, and then I deprive my kid of the chance to
Yeah.
make it. And I can't be on a comp soccer team and a comp basketball team and a travel baseball team, because I either can't afford it or don't have time, or all the variables, which is a horrible position to
Oh,
be
yeah,
put
totally.
people in.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
But that's the reality of
Yeah.
the decision they're facing.
I think it's an institutional problem, because
Sure.
I hear from parents all the time and hear from players all the time. Like, I can appreciate the struggle you're in, because
Yeah.
your coach over here is telling you if you're not playing year round them, you're not going to start.
Yeah.
And then you're playing on a team, riding the bench, and you know that all it took was just a little bit extra game like reps, and you'd be right up with the rest of them. But it's this belief that you need to be like constantly at it all the time, over and over and over again. It puts a huge struggle on decision making.
No, we have a solution.
It's terrible.
No, we have a great solution, and it's really what we do with Kime, and particularly what we do with our alliances with our gyms. And it's giving people a strength and conditioning program, not in the way that we think a professional athlete S&C program or even a collegiate athlete, but the youth S&C is the antidote of the sport. So if they're rotating excessively in baseball, or they're burning out their arm in baseball, then S&C work, some gym work, some fitness work allows them to do other things and be involved in good physical preparedness, some GPP work that allows for development and how it should be. And then we get to use it as the guise of, well, yeah, we're making them a better athlete so that they're better at baseball, but in reality, we're giving them the antidote to a 12-month sport. So I think there is a solution here, because it got sad there for a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I would say to families, parents, to other athletes that think they should be specializing early, it's just, and all the pressure that goes along with that, is to recognize that the development cycle of youth, like I have a 10-year-old son, and the development cycle of youth is highly variable. Where there's some kids right now that are 9 or 10 that are clearly above and beyond where my son is, and where many other boys are. But knowing what I know, and being in my profession for as long as I have, and seeing kids from this age group up through the age of 18, half of them probably aren't going to continue to play soccer, or they're going to do something else. They might be bigger than everybody else now, but once the other kids hit a growth spurt, guess what? These kids don't grow anymore. I have very specific examples of athletes who were like dominant at 10, 11, 12 years old, because they're the biggest kid on the field and dominant, and they didn't make the high school team because they got passed up by the age of 14, and now they're the slowest kid on the field because they're still the biggest, but now they're slow. Whereas this other kid that's now growing up and can compete a little more and matured. So, and there's a coach will always find room for the better player. That at the end of the day, we have to keep that in mind, that if you can't play, you can't play.
Yeah, 100%.
But if you're an athlete, the coach is going to find room for you on the roster. No matter if you come in and they already got 14 on the roster or not, if you can actually move and you can play, then there'll be a spot for you. Now, if you can't, then that's a reality we have to face, and then you go down your path you go down. But
Yeah.
so anyways, it's certainly a good debatable topic, and it's a tough spot, I think, emotionally for people and families, and thus depending on the environments that they're in. But a super good question, but we all would agree for sure that it's best for human development and sport development and athletic development that the person is more well-rounded in their process than being specific to say, hey, let's go down one path. I think there's no question about that. But obviously there's unique situations where you have to make the call. But yeah. Thanks for watching KIMEcast. We'll catch you on the next one. This was KIMEcast, and we are the Kime Human Performance Institute. Thank you very much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation with you. Please hop on our social media. It's at KIMEHPI, and engage with us there. If you'd like us to feature a topic or answer any questions live on the show, post your comments there. You can also check us out on our website at kimeperformance.com, and there you can see links to content that we've posted throughout our podcast for more information.